Hey guys, my name's Kevin and I passed the July 2018 California bar exam. This video is to share my tips and strategies on how to pass the written portion of the exam and how to approach it when you're studying for those couple months. I made two previous videos where I detailed what the day of the bar exam is actually like, and also another video detailing my high-level overview on studying for the California bar exam. I recommend viewing those two videos as well to get yourself more familiar with the overall approach. This video will be just about the written portion of the exam. Now let's get into it. The California bar exam is split 50% to the multiple choice and 50% to the written portion of the exam. The first day of your bar examination will be the written portion of the exam. You're going to have 3 essays in the morning for a total of 3 hours, and then you're going to have a break and you're going to have 3 additional essays in the afternoon for 3.5 hours. Of those 6 essays, every one of them is worth 100 points, except for the very last essay, the performance test, which is worth 200 points. The essays can cover any one of the 8 core MBE subjects, professional responsibility, or any 8 additional subjects, including California civil procedure, California evidence, wills, trusts, remedies, and so on. In order to adequately prepare for the California bar exam, you need to study all of these subjects together, not just those core 8 MBE subjects. This can seem overwhelming, but I will detail an approach that I took in my studies to allocate my time and resources efficiently so I knew I could approach exam day with confidence. Let me first by saying that there's no substitute for putting in the time and energy into studying for the California bar exam. You simply need to block out all of your summer or winter whenever you're taking the exam to just focus on learning as much material as possible. Now, that being said, I developed an approach to let the core 8 MBE subjects and professional responsibility guide my approach to studying on the exam. Let me explain. I figured statistically and historically, the 6 essays would look something like this. Number 1, the performance test was a given. The California bar examiners tell you that you're gonna get the performance test. Now the good thing is that's worth 2 essays, that's worth 200 points. So you know right out the gate, if you learn how to do the performance test, you're going to have an advantage and a leg up on the essay portion. Secondly, you know the California bar exam written section is going to have professional responsibility on there, either in whole or in part. In my examination in July 2018, it showed up as a full essay. That's usually the case. Now, a lot of students don't dedicate the time and effort to learn professional responsibility for whatever reason. A lot of students can think that taking professional responsibility in your law school or simply glossing over it and learning, oh, I understand the ethical rules, they're kind of common sense, can guide them through the essay approach, but that's not the right way to do it. You need to dedicate the time and effort to learn all of the granular professional responsibility nuances so that you could perform on an essay that is 99% sure going to be on your California bar exam. So that leaves 4 remaining essays of which you don't really know what's going to be on them. That being said, of those 4 essays, I figured statistically and historically, one of them would be an MBE subject. Let me explain. Of those remaining 4 essays, you had a roughly 50-50 shot of it being an MBE subject because there are 8 core MBE subjects and about 8 or 9 additional peripheral subjects like California evidence, remedies, wills, trusts, business associations, and so on. So if you were to determine of those 4 essays, you had a 50-50 shot of any one of them being an MBE subject, and you multiply that out, you would determine that there's a less than 7% chance of all 4 of those essays not being an MBE subject. In addition to that, never before since 1985 has the California bar exam not had a standalone MBE subject on its own. And if you think about it, this makes sense. The California bar examiners want to determine if you have the minimum competency in the broad range of subject matter to be an attorney. Therefore, I figured that one of those 4 essays would be a standalone MBE subject. This made it such that I really knew I had to study those core 8 MBE subjects with vigor in order to do well. Now, based upon that reasoning, I determined that I knew 4 out of the 7 possible scored essays, when counting the performance test as 2 scored essays, going into the California bar exam. This psychologically really helped me. In addition, I used a website called One Timers, which allowed me to plug in my MBE score, my practice exams, and then plug in a rough idea of my passing or non-passing scores on my California essays and determine if I were to pass the California bar exam. With that being said, I figured if I passed the performance test, the professional responsibility essay on the exam, and the MBE question on the exam, I knew that I was going to have a passing score if I did well on my MBE section in the second day of the examination. Psychologically, this really helped me, but more importantly, from a time management perspective, as I got closer to exam day, I dedicated a lot more of my time to studying the core 8 MBE subjects instead of spending a lot of time on the peripheral subjects like remedies or wills and trusts. Those are important to study. You need to learn all of that material, but I knew that of the 8 MBE subjects, they were going to show up on the multiple choice section, and they statistically and historically were also going to show up on the written portion of the exam. I knew that if I put all of my eggs in only one basket, I wouldn't be successful, but if I dedicated proportionally more time to those 8 MBE subjects, I would be successful. So that being said, that's kind of my psychological approach to the exam. Let me go into my tips and strategies on the essays themselves. Number 1, you need to use the Irack Formula. Likely you've used this in law school many times. It's issue, rule, application, and conclusion. Whenever you approach an essay, you're going to read it over, you're going to have a lot of issues come out at you, and you need to grab those issues, write down the rule, apply the facts to the rule, and then come to a conclusion on that particular subject. The Irack formula is going to be the standard formula that you use on your exam. Occasionally, you're going to use a slightly different version, but most of the time, Irack is a great way to use your examination and to show the bar examiners that you know your law and you know how to apply it. My second piece of advice is to use timing and get used to using a watch, an analog watch, when you do your essays. You're going to have roughly an hour per essay, except for the performance test, of which you should allocate an hour and a half. I use the approach of reading my prompt for 5 minutes very carefully and very slowly, using 10 minutes to outline my exam and to really determine what the key issues were, what the rule I was going to use with that key issue, and what a fact or two might be helpful in my analysis on my outline. Then I spent 40 minutes writing the actual essay, and then a couple minutes at the end to clean up my essay, make sure that my spelling was coherent, make sure that I underlined where I needed to, and really made it as clear as possible for the bar examiners to read through my examination. Timing is key. This examination is not a very difficult examination on its own if you were to have enough timing. The thing that gets a lot of students is that they don't allocate enough time, or they spend too little time on an essay. This is the downfall of everybody. You need to get in the habit of determining with a very methodical approach with your watch or with your timing on your computer how much time you should be spending reading and outlining and then actually writing your examination. Number 3, this is a small one, but the structure of your essays should be very clear to your examiners. You do not want to write a very long essay with no spaces and no underlines at all. It's going to hit them like a wall of text, and they're not going to be able to go through it very quickly and determine, oh, he got this issue or she got this issue as they go through their examination. They're going to be reading, hundreds and hundreds of these essays. You want to make it as clear and easy as possible for them to determine that you know the law. And the key ways that I did this is I used lots of spacing. So I would determine what the issue was. I'd write my rule and analysis and conclusion, space, and then do an additional rule and go from there. I would be sure to underline each one of my headers on every one of my paragraphs so that they knew where my analysis began and where it ended. These can seem like little things, but you're really going to benefit yourself if you take the time to actually space out your essays. I recommend going online and viewing past examinations and seeing what the successful students did. You're going to be able to go online and see what the students who scored 95 or 100, the 1 or 2 students that did, and see that they did this approach. They underlined, they used lots of spaces in their essays. And this allowed the examiners to go through quickly and say, oh, there's an issue, there's an issue, there's an issue, and give you a lot of points in your essay. Number 4, I took the approach of laying out every issue that I could possibly see on the essay. If I saw an issue, even if it was a peripheral one, I made sure that I put it on paper, because if you don't do that, the examiners will never know that you know the law. You need to put as much possible on the paper. You don't want to be verbose, and you don't want to spend too much time on some side issues and not get the main issues, but it's important to be able to throw at the examiners all of the knowledge that you've accumulated over those couple months and couple years in law school. For example, if you get a prompt where plaintiff was robbed by defendant, one of your smaller arguments, and it won't be the main one, will be that defendant committed an act of battery upon plaintiff because defendant, for example, grabbed plaintiff's purse, and the purse is an extension of plaintiff's person. This is an example of a smaller issue which you should absolutely put in your essays and be able to explain what the issue is, what the rule is, and apply the facts to that rule, and then come to a conclusion and move on. If you don't put it on the piece of paper, the examiners won't know that you know the law. And in the bar examination, if you get more and more issues spotted and more applications of the rule to those issues, you're going to pick up more points and you're going to have a passing score on that essay. Number 5, I took an approach to the performance test which is a little different than what I learned in my bar review course. So in the performance test, it'll be your very last essay in your afternoon section of the exam. You're going to have 3.5 hours to do your 3 essays. Usually people allocate an hour to the first essay, an hour to the second essay, and an hour and a half to your performance test. I took a slightly different approach. I allocated 55 minutes to the first 2 essays and then took those additional 10 minutes and applied them to my performance test, giving myself a little extra time. An hour and 40 minutes, for me personally, was very helpful. And I'll explain why. So the first 2 essays are going to be things that you've studied. You know the black letter law and you could apply it to the facts. And by the time I got to the bar examination, I had studied so much that it was so easy and it was like muscle memory to be able to pull those black letter laws and rules and apply them to the prompt that I was given. This isn't the case with the performance test. The performance test, you're not supposed to draw upon any outside knowledge. They're going to give you everything in your closed universe materials. This is a little daunting because you have to know everything cold in your 25 to 30 pages in order to write a really good essay. In order to do best on the performance test, what I found for me is I needed a little bit extra time in the front end to do research and really organize my thoughts. So I gave myself an extra 10 minutes by allocating the time earlier in my first 2 essays to that section of the performance test. This kind of meshed with my whole approach to the writing section because in my timing section, my timing tip that I gave, I said you should give 5 minutes to read the prompt, 10 minutes to outline the prompt, 40 minutes to write, and 5 minutes to clean up your essay. I knew that if I took a few of those minutes, it would probably be on the cleanup section of the first 2 essays, and I wouldn't really lose any, substantive writing in those first essays, and I wouldn't really lose much in the way of points. But I knew I would gain them if I put them off and use them for the performance test. Another thing I mentioned about the performance test is that it's crucial to do as many as you possibly can in your bar prep course. A lot of people will gloss over them or outline them or kind of go through half of them. I highly discourage this approach. It is very important to actually use an hour and a half every single time that you take your essays and go through with your performance test and go through and actually take the full examination. It's very difficult to study for that exam other than doing this approach. When you do this approach, you're going to realize that there's certain patterns and techniques and things that the bar examiners like to see that you can apply on exam day. The first one that comes to mind for me is that the key in making a good performance test essay is organization. You need to be able to say, number 1, the issue, and then 1 or 2 reasons or 3 reasons why your issue should or should not be proven this way, and so on and so forth. You need to use numbers. You need to really organize your thoughts in a coherent way to be successful on the performance exam. Number 6, I strongly recommend actually practicing by taking full-on essays every single time you do them. Don't simply bullet point, don't simply outline. You need to actually sit down and for 30 or 40 minutes or maybe even a full hour, actually take essays. Because if you don't do this, you're going to be mentally fatigued on exam day. You're not going to be able to approach it. You're not going to be able to know how much you're supposed to expand on your essay. You need to actually practice by really giving yourself full blocks of time and typing them out. For me, I must have taken 50 or 60 different essays. I saved them all on my computer. I would type them out. I didn't write them because I was typing on exam day. And doing this allowed me to gain my skills in typing. It allowed me to gain my skills in organization and familiarity with how to actually break it up on the essays. And the key thing I would say about this is that if you outline or bullet point, this can really hide your ignorance and your lack of knowledge of the law. If you bullet point something, you may think that you know the answer, but if you write it out, you're going to find that sometimes your knowledge isn't as strong in one area as it could be. You need to be able to write it out to be able to see where your gaps of knowledge are, and be sure to clean them up during your summer or winter months whenever you're studying for the exam, so you don't have that on exam day. And lastly, my number one tip is to use so-called slapdowns. Slapdowns are verbatim memorizations of certain key rules per subject that you can use and slap down on your essays whenever you see an issue arise that relates to that rule. Let me explain. If you're dealing with, for example, evidence, you know more than likely you're going to have a hearsay issue on your evidence prompt. If you don't know the hearsay rule verbatim, you're going to waste valuable time and energy trying to recall and formulate that rule on your exam day. However, if you knew that hearsay is an out-of-court statement used to prove the truth of the matter asserted, and you stated it as such and you threw it down on your essay, you wouldn't have to waste any time trying to come up with the rule or remember the rule. Some key ways to memorize slapdowns are to look at past examinations from students or your bar prep course and see how they formulated the rule. I actually created a list of my own slapdowns for every subject, so 2 or 3 for evidence, 2 or 3 for civil procedure, 1 or 2 for wills and trusts, that I kept and I studied as I was going through my prep period, and I memorized those and I used them actually on exam day. I will link what I used below in the description if you want to download it. I recommend looking at that and using it as a guide and adding to it or modifying it as you think is best. But if you use this as a jumping off point and understand what slapdowns are and how they could help you, it can really add a lot of, it can be really beneficial for you on exam day. So much of the written section of the exam is stating what the black letter law is and applying the rules. If you know what the black letter law is verbatim and you apply it to your examination, it's going to be easy to use those facts and apply them to that rule. It's going to be second nature, muscle memory. If you learn these slapdowns cold, you're going to be very successful on exam day because you know that you're going to have a lot of tools at your disposal which won't distract you and waste time and energy trying to formulate your best approach to your essays. And that's it for my tips and strategies on the California written section of the exam. It's a very approachable portion of the exam. Students get scared, but trust me, if you have enough practice and you go into it with the right techniques, you will be very successful. All you need to do is study hard and study smart, and you will pass the California bar exam. Good luck.